Welcome back, everyone, to OpenLine. We are talking about the death penalty in Tennessee. Tomorrow, in 24 hours, Stephen Michael West is set to be executed. He has chosen the electric chair here in Tennessee. Tennessee has been using the death penalty more and more. This will be the second person executed if it happens tomorrow under our new governor, Bill Lee. And I have with us Stacy Rector. She's with Tennesseans for Alternative to the Death Penalty, and a lot of calls. So let's just go to the phones. Let's go to Joe, who was on line one, called in first. Joe, hello.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
I have a couple of things to just point out. I think that in the 20th century, there were mistakes made, people were sentenced to death, and so for those people that were convicted in the 20th century, I think the death penalty may be, able for them to get a clemency or to get a pardon. Still, in the 21st century, there's an old phrase, the proof is in the pudding. I think in the 21st century, people now that are sentenced to death, I think that there's enough proof in that to sentence them to that. But I want to tell you about a phrase of Thomas Jefferson's. He said, error of opinion may be tolerated where reason is left free to combat it. And the opinion seems to be eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, where the only case we do that in a criminal offense is when somebody kills somebody. I mean, if somebody steals something or if somebody punches somebody in the nose, they don't recommend that they get punched in the nose. So I think the 21st century, a death sentence should mean that when your appellate court runs out, there's going to be no clemency for you. You're going to stay in prison. There's going to be no pardon for you. You're going to stay in prison, and there you die in prison. And that's my opinion, and I'd like to hear what you guys have to say.
Okay. All right, what do you think about what he's saying there?
Well, it sounds like, and I may have misunderstood, but it sounds like he was recommending life without parole as opposed to the death penalty. I could have misunderstood that, but I do think his point about sort of the evidence and the strides we've made, moving into the 21st century, and I think it's a good point. I do though think, because of CSI and some of the shows about forensic evidence, that we do sort of have this idea that all these cases have that kind of evidence. And I have learned over the years, and was kind of surprised to learn, that it's really a very small percentage of cases that have forensic evidence available. It's something like 10 to 15%. So what we've learned with all of the cases where we have had DNA exonerations is, okay, what then went wrong? And what we've seen is how unreliable eyewitness identification is, because people are terrified and traumatized, and they have a very hard time remembering. We've seen that people under duress, when they're interrogated, or perhaps are mentally ill or don't understand what's going on, will confess to things that they did not do. Something like 25% of all DNA exonerations beyond death row, across the board, people confessed. Jailhouse snitches. There's all these other things that we determined by DNA. Oh my goodness, look at all these things that we thought were pretty foolproof that aren't. So we always have to be careful with assuming that we're to a point where, oh yeah, we're going to get it right every time, because frankly, that's just still not the case.
Right. Okay. Joe, thanks for that call. Let's go to Marilyn. Hello, Marilyn.
Yes,
Go right ahead.
Okay, I agree that the system is not working equally. However, in my son's case of murder, it was. His killer was convicted of first-degree murder, which is with the 51 years before parole. However, are you aware, or how do you feel about a group who are trying to get first-degree murder conviction in Tennessee reduced drastically because of the cost of the housing of them? So one way or another, whether they are going to be executed and have to go through all of these years of conviction, of housing, or the 51 years, we're still going to have to be paying as taxpayers to house them. So how do you feel about that other group that's trying to get the sentencing for first-degree murder reduced?
Well, I would obviously have to look into this a lot more, Marilyn, because I really focus on the death penalty. But I think we have to have serious alternatives to the death penalty to make sure that people are held accountable and that the public is kept safe. In Tennessee, we do have life without the possibility of parole, which does not allow any, parole hearings. If you get life without parole, you are there for life. I think probably what is happening is there are probably some people who feel that the life sentence and life without parole are somewhat redundant, because the likelihood is that somebody in prison probably isn't going to live out 51 years. So my hunch is that may be because it seems like a redundant sentence. However, Marilyn, I believe that currently Tennessee, given those alternatives that we have right now, has the ability and the alternatives necessary to not utilize the death penalty.
What I hear Marilyn saying, and apparently, her son horribly was murdered, and someone was convicted for that crime.
Yes.
We have had someone on this show talking about prison reform, saying that our prisons are overcrowded and some of our sentences are out of touch and should be reduced. And I think somebody who has suffered through what Marilyn has suffered through is worried that, okay, we do away with the death penalty, then we do away with life without parole, and suddenly people get out.
Yes, and that is the fear, and I am in no way endorsing that.
You think there should be a harsh penalty? I mean, if we have prison reform, in some of these cases, though, that penalty, people shouldn't get out if they did it.
There has to be a serious alternative that recognizes the harm that has been done and that protects society. But I would say the hope would always be that anyone in prison for whatever length of time could be given opportunity to change and grow and learn from what has happened. Doesn't mean they get out, but I would certainly hope that we could think about how we are treating people once they're incarcerated and what are we offering them to become different people.
Let's go to Tony. Hello, Tony. Are you there, Tony?
Yes.
Go right ahead. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I have a question for y'all. It's, back whenever Philip Mortman was executed, all of a sudden, because a policeman was killed and the bullet was lost. I mean, does this make any sense to anybody out there? Because the main thing, what I'm thinking, that he was killed by another policeman, and if that was the case, the main piece of evidence was lost, and the policemen sign up to do these jobs, but whenever they make a mistake, sometimes everybody, it just seems like a cover-up to me that he was killed by friendly fire, and that Philip Mortman might not should have been put to death. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
All right. That's going back a few years.
It is, but I think what I believe it was Tony is just reminding us is of all the things that can go wrong, the process issues, the legal issues, the evidence issues. Regardless of what happened in Philip Mortman's case or other cases, we are saying that our system is working so well all the time that we can trust it 100% to take the life of a citizen. And I think that we really have to look at that long and hard to see if we truly believe that, and if we don't, we need to get rid of the death penalty.
Let's go to Jamal. Hello, Jamal.
Hi, how you doing tonight, man?
Doing great. Go ahead.
I just want to bring it up to date. We just had a convict escape from prison who raped and killed a worker at the prison,
Right.
and they recaptured him. Do you think he should be killed? We have all this news coverage. We have all this evidence that he did that. He's been in prison for, 10 years? And if we don't get him out of the system, we're just going to keep paying. But I think I brought this up a week ago or something about when we were talking about guns.
Right.
But immediate, 5 years he's dead. Because we have the evidence. We know he did it. And he's not going to be rehabilitated.
All right, well, let's talk about that. Jamal, I appreciate your call. I mean, so there is a case. He did it. I mean, there's not any real doubt about his innocence. And now he's back in jail where he could harm other people again. And so that's a different case than some of these others where we, waited all these many years. What about when people say, well, there's an example of where the death penalty should be applied?
Right. Well, there's a couple of issues there. One is, I think Jamal's point about, we just need to be able to carry out the sentence. It doesn't work that way. We have constitutional obligations. Defendants have certain rights within the system. That's part of what our founding fathers did when they created the Constitution, was you're innocent until proven guilty, and then there are processes and procedures. And because of that, and because, again, even in a case like this, we have to cross the T's and dot the I's, this takes a long time.
And if we were to move it along in that case, where, yes, he did it. I mean, we know that. But if we were to move it along in that case, then it could expand to other cases, and that's when our liberties are...
Right. We have to have procedures and process and due process and people's rights, and I know that's hard because these crimes are outrageous and we're so offended, but it's for everyone's own protection that we have a Constitution that's set up this way, right?
For if we are arrested, then
Correct.
That's the system that would be followed.
That's right. Second point is, I do want to just make, and certainly this crime was so heinous and devastating, I know, for the TDOC, for this family, for the state. But this is not a situation where this individual was in my understanding, again, in sort of a high-level security situation. He was someone that had been allowed to, because of his behavior, be mowing the lawn, right? So it's a little difficult to compare when people are kept in very supervised settings within the prison versus someone who's out mowing a lawn, right? Those are very different things. And so I think our system and our correctional officers, I think, would tell you that they have the capability and the checks and balances to make sure that these things don't happen on the inside. And frankly, Tennessee's record, I think, is fairly good on that. So again, it's just another point to consider when we're thinking about all this.
Okay, that's a good point. All right, let's go to Allie. Hello, Allie? Allie, are you there?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Go right ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. And I really appreciate the conversation about the death penalty. I kind of wanted to kind of state an opinion and then see if Stacy might be able to kind of share her ideas about this. Because, the death penalty seems to reflect a certain type of philosophy about how we view crime and what the state's responsibility is in responding to that crime. It seems very punitive to me. It seems like the purpose of the criminal justice system is to punish people for wrongdoing as opposed to deterring crime or protecting the public or, tagging people who might need extra services or whatever. And I wanted to hear, I know that's kind of a loaded question, but I wanted to hear Stacy's ideas about that.
About how this is reflective of a societal desire to punish, essentially?
Yes.
Okay. All right. What about that?
Well, certainly, I do think this is why giving people information about the system is so important, because when we have these heinous crimes that occur, people are so upset, as well they should be. They're afraid, they're outraged, and we have to be able to step back and look at this, as citizens looking at a public policy and whether or not we think it's working or not. As far as the punitive nature, yes, I think the death penalty obviously represents probably the pinnacle of the punitive side of the criminal justice system. And I certainly hope, and I see some signs of it, though, it kind of ebbs and flows, of this notion of more restorative systems where it's not framed as the state against the offender, but it's framed as who got harmed and how do we repair that harm, bringing the victims of the crime, the family members of the victims into the conversation in a way that is less about how do we punish and more about how do we restore and try to figure out what this family, this community needs in the wake of this horrific crime. So it's a little bit of a different way of thinking about it. And I think you see that happening, within Tennessee and other places. Certainly, I think they're doing more of that with juvenile offenses, and I think it's really seems to have some real positive results where we're seeing people actually understanding more and taking responsibility for things because they're actually dealing with the person who was harmed as opposed to the state. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, there are a few issues out there that are so divisive and so emotional.
Yeah.
Last night we had abortion on.
Right,
and
right.
Boy, that is a tough one. This, I feel like a few years ago, was on that level.
Mm-hmm.
It was as divisive. Do you feel like, is it moving to be less divisive, or where do you think we are? I mean, I like the way she framed that there's a societal desire at times to punish, which I understand.
Right, sure.
But are we moving away, or are we evolving, changing, in your opinion, kind of in the last 10, 20 years?
I think so. I think that, again, I think when people, it's been my experience anyway in this work, when people are given the information, when they hear the stories, when they see the realities of innocent people going to death row, or crimes where someone with a severe mental illness ends up getting a much harsher punishment than someone else, or when they walk with a family that's trying to navigate the death penalty system for 30 years in the wake of a horrible crime. I mean, when you start seeing how, okay, one county in Tennessee is responsible for almost half of death row, while other counties have never sent anybody to death row. When they find out just how much taxpayers are paying to maintain a system that is basically providing nothing, it's not making us safer, it's not fairly applied, it's really doing none of the things that it was told to us that it would do. So as people get all that information, what I'm finding is they're going, okay, well, if we have alternatives, that's the key. If we feel that society can be protected and violent offenders can be held accountable, we're okay with moving away from the death penalty. But I think folks need to believe that and understand that we do have those alternatives.
All right, we're going to take a break. Reverend Fuzz, Ed, Tony, others, hold on the line. We'll take a break and be back right after this.